by the nacelles. And that's why the Enterprise, the lower fuselage has that curvature to it. The nacelles have little skegs on them. All of the parts of it are designed so that it's literally surfing forward. And then, of course, the deflector beam is shooting downrange to clear things out of the way. Because when you're going the speed of light, you hit a meteor or you hit, debris in space, it's going to, blow the thing to pieces. Because what is the speed of light? 5,280 feet a second or something like that is like phenomenal, fast. So just coming up with the kind of rules of what actually is happening. How does the engine room work? And to make those things look interesting visually.
Richard, did you have your own design for what the Enterprise should look like, i.e., something completely different from the Enterprise as we know it? And then did you get into some kind of arm wrestling competition with Gene Roddenberry to say, whoever wins, that's the design?
Well, he was always going to win. So, he was the godfather of it all. And during all of the production meetings and when I would present the design for anything, be it the work bee, be it the shuttle, be it the Vulcan shuttle, which was a really cool design, one of my favorite designs in the film. And the Vulcan having to come and separate, and then the fuselage of it dock at the back of the bridge for the entrance of Spock into the movie. So the functionality of all those things. So to answer your question, I had done little sketches on my own when I heard we were going to do it, just thinking, because I always have a sketchbook, and I was doing different designs that I thought would be really cool, that would be more balanced and more kind of make more sense and so forth. I didn't really show those to Roddenberry because when I first met with him about the Enterprise, and I had the pictures from Matt Jeffries' model and so forth, I met with Gene, and he basically defined for me what it needed to be. I said, can I redesign it? Can I do the whole new design? I've got ideas and all this. He didn't say, well, let me see them. He basically said, no, it has to have that same configuration, because that configuration is a character that people will recognize. It is the icon of the Star Trek franchise. So he said, you can change proportions, you can do things. And I said, well, look what Matt's done here on this. Can I continue along that line and then work from there? And he said, yes. But he had very specific things. I mean, one of the things, and many of the things that he wanted, I didn't think were practical or made any sense at all, but he thought they did. And so he dictated that there are certain things. For example, the fact that the doors to the Enterprise are 12 foot in diameter, circular doors. Nobody, astronauts that we had come in that we would talk to when I would do presentations of stuff, nobody in their mind would ever say, we want a 12 foot in diameter circular door, because 12 feet is huge. And circular, you get into, well, how does it open and close? And I said, okay, well, do we have to have those big circular? He said, yes. And I said, well, how can it open? Can I iris them open? Like a camera iris, so it like iris open and then iris close the doors. He said, no, you can't do that. And so how do you put doors on a circular 12-foot thing and have them open and close? So the only solution that I came up with was that the doors had to literally be mounted in the circular shape, like on the back of the shuttle when Scotty and Kirk come up and finally dock with the Enterprise. So that craft had to have a 12-foot in diameter door on the back of it, which dictated the design of that thing. I had designs that were so much more cool than that, but having that big door at the back really limited the shape of it. So what happens is the doors literally slide into the skin of the craft that it docks with and then slide back in. If you were out in space and you had to open it, those doors would just blow out of there and go floating off into space. So I did design an escape hatch on the top and the bottom of that craft that were smaller, that were right above where they were by the front window and stuff. So the only way in and out of that craft if there was emergency wasn't the big circular door. But right there was a very limiting thing, and completely impractical as far as I was concerned, but that's what he mandated. Likewise, lots of things about the interior design, the bridge especially, that's where I got into back and forth with Gene quite a bit, where I bring drawings and say, look, if we could do this, this would look better, would make more sense. And many, many times he agreed. Obviously one of the first ones that I brought up was, that they needed to have, Kurt's chair and all of the crew's seats around the bridge needed to have a way of keeping them in place, because from the television show, as you know, they were standing around falling over, and when they got into turbulence and stuff, it was like, that's what made me think that the original Star Trek series was a comedy. That kind of, wait a minute, this is this far in the future. These people are so brilliant to create an Enterprise, yet they don't have seat belts.
Well, yeah, it is. It's remarkable that they can go from a standing still position to faster than the speed of light. And of course, the whole idea is that they have inertial dampeners to stop them being squashed into the back of the ship. At that. Yeah. But when they get broadsided by a torpedo, the inertial dampeners don't keep them in their seats. They fall to one side or they fall to the other.
They fall to one side and they're standing up, a bunch of them, stumbling and acting like they're, there's a big difference if you put somebody on a set and the set really does move. Then
on a gimbal, yeah.
You literally move based on the real inertias of things that happen. When you ask people to act like the thing that's being bounced around, you see it immediately. So it's it's a comedy deal, and then of course you shake the camera and do all kinds of things to try and make that more believable. But the fact is that they needed to be held in position, and Roddenberry went along with that, and so I designed seats that folded up over them.
Can I ask you a question about the seats? Because there's a couple of shots of Kirk sitting in his center seat, and he has this headrest behind him. This obviously comes up from the back of the seat. Now,
yes,
I've always been convinced that is a T-square that's covered in a fabric.
Well, no, it wasn't a T-square, but because of the configuration, you probably felt that. But yeah, that part of the seat was designed so it would come up and down based upon, because again, if you get into a fighter jet or anything where you're pulling G's and being thrown around, your head, if you don't have a headrest of some kind, just like in any fast car, you have a headrest, so you're going to break your neck. So that, what I want to do is when they would sit down in the seat, that would rise, the armrests would come over them as their seat belt in essence, and so the thing would configure itself to them when they sat in it. And to keep it a lower profile, when they weren't sitting in it, that would retract. Yeah, so the design of the seat was one of the first things, and then everything about the bridge. I wanted to bring in the newest technology. I had seen that the Lawrence Livermore Lab and other places were starting to work to screens as a way of controlling, technology on their big Shiva laser and all that stuff, where they were doing, Lawrence Livermore was doing all this research into fusion energy and all of that. And so, but they, and I had seen that tactile screens were something that was coming, and meaning that what's on the screen could change design, and wherever you touched it, the buttons could be where you want. And to me, that would be really interesting visually, and it would be modern. So the console there in front of Kirk and Sulu. So he basically, when Kirk would say, do something, he would, aye, Captain, and he would push the buttons or pull the things that would make that happen with the Enterprise, whether it was jumping to light speed or whatever, or just maneuvering out of the dry dock or anything like that, would follow that stuff and use these controls. Well, in the television show, there were literally buttons and toggle switches and things like that. From like the 50s era of technology. And so I brought up the idea of doing this tactile screen, which we would have rear projected on the actual set piece. But he wouldn't do it. He said, no, I want buttons and I want switches and I want physical, things that they touch and push and slide. And so right there was kind of the way that Roddenberry thought in certain ways. He'd say, no, I want this, and just do it. Another thing that I wanted to redesign was around the perimeter of the bridge where the communications officer and Spock and everybody else sat. Those screens that they had around them in the television series were circular or oval, and they had just this abstract shapes of things just kind of happening on there. There weren't really numbers or data or anything. It was just like these abstract things, and they never touched those screens. They talked on their headpiece to each other, and they had controls very similar to Sulu that they would touch to do these different things.
Yeah, they were like oscilloscopes. They looked like the screen of an oscilloscope. And I used to think that people who could read data off an oscilloscope screen were absolute geniuses, because they could just look at this green blob bouncing across the screen and say, oh, that's a Type M class cruiser, and it's coming at us at 57 knots per second, and it'll be in range in 2 minutes. And I'm thinking, really? Because to me, that's a green dot bouncing across a screen.
Right.
I could never figure out those things.
If you really used a real oscilloscope, there is a graph over and then there are sine waves of different shapes and so forth, with different peaks, and so with the define, the wavelength or the signal that's coming in on something, but at least there's a graph over it. They aren't just totally abstract. So I proposed that those screens around there could be tactile, and therefore the imagery could keep changing. And I thought that it would be just one big screen that went all the way around, and in front of each crew member, their data would come up in the shape of what they did. He didn't buy that at all. He said, no, I want circular screens. And they ended up being oval. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, because it's the way I want it. And I said, but because I didn't want to get into arguments with him. That was something I was very careful that I wouldn't say, sir, that is the dumbest fucking idea I've ever heard. I basically say, oh, well, why is it? Have you thought about, have you considered that there could be one screen and has graphics on it that they can physically touch? And he said, no, I want circular screens. I said, well, circular screens are the least efficient as far as putting the amount of data on. A rectilinear screen, you get more imagery than you do in a circular screen, and he wouldn't have it. He said, no, I want circular screens, and I want very abstract kind of stuff on there. So those are some of the things I dealt with. But I was able to make the bridge look more modern. One of the things was adding that whole piece, the navigational sphere and so forth, above, coming down like a celestial sphere kind of thing, so that, it felt more like it was a navigation, part of the navigation system. And it also gave an upper edge to the frame of the wider shots of the bridge that, made it more interesting looking. And then, of course, I made the view screen wider, like CinemaScope kind of proportions, much wider so it wasn't so square. It became much more horizontal and had a curvature to it instead of a straight flat screen. So those were, key things that we did. And we knew that there was all the sequence that was going to happen on the bridge with the energy probe coming on board, and how we were going to do that. And I could get into how that was done, which was truly amazing what we actually did for that energy probe, how we lit that bridge with that energy probe, how it could move around and overexpose that bridge with brilliant white light is not easy. Basically, it was a strobe light that was a strobe light like used at airport runways, but it was a tube that Stuart Ziff worked on the design of this whole thing. So there was a plastic capsule with this incredibly bright strobe tube in it that was about 5 feet long, or almost 6 feet long. And it was that plastic tube, to keep anybody from hitting that thing or breaking it and all of that, was held on a Steadicam rig by an operator. A Steadicam rig, you can float something around. They're made for cameras, but we adapted one so we could carry this big strobe tube and a person dressed in all black could walk around and float that thing around